The city was never really asleep, but at this hour it was unnervingly quiet. The wind sliced through the bare streets like a knife, whispering through the crevices of crumbling edifices. Streetlights wavered and cast long shadows over crumbling sidewalks. Story comment below, where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Ben hugged his thin coat around his body to ward off the chill. His stomach rumbled, a dull reminder that he hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. But hunger was an old acquaintance now, one he had learned to live with. Then he heard it, a sound so soft he almost imagined it, a whimper, software weak, pained. Ben froze. His instincts told him to let it go. He was a years-long drifter, and he had one rule that kept him alive: keep moving. Don't get involved. Don't stop. But there was something about this sound that glued him to the spot. Gradually, he faced the alley alongside him. His breath caught. 2 bright, amber eyes gazed at him from the shadow. A dog. A stray like him. The creature stepped forward, limping into the dim light. Its fur, once thick and beautiful, was matted with dirt and streaked with dried blood. Its ribs protruded beneath its skin, every breath shallow and labored. But it wasn't only the condition of the dog that gave Ben a chill up his spine. It had to do with the way the dog was staring at him. Not with fear, not with aggression, but with recognition, as if it knew him. Ben swallowed hard. "Hey there, buddy." The dog flinched, its muscles clenching as if about to run. Ben extended his hand, not moving otherwise. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The dog hesitated. Then it hesitated and moved very slowly, almost too slowly, forward 1 step. Ben could see it now, the deep wound on its side, the old scars buried beneath its fur. This was one hell of a dog, and yet it had survived. The dog took another step, then another, and finally it nudged its head into Ben's palm. A warmth flooded Ben's chest. He had nothing, no money, no home. But gazing into the dog's amber eyes, he knew this much was true. He wouldn't leave him, because this dog had a story, and whatever it was, it had only just begun. The cold nipped at Ben's skin as he cinched his coat tighter, looking down at the dog at his side. It was hardly on its feet, its legs trembling from fatigue. Every few steps it would stop, wavering a little, as if about to topple. Ben sighed. He could hardly take care of himself. What was he doing, bringing in a stray? Yet he couldn't leave him. The dog had chosen him. And there was something about him, something that made Ben's stomach twist in a manner he could not name. They walked, without speaking, through the deserted city streets, the sound of occasional distant traffic and rustling trash their only companions. He knew exactly what he was looking for. The abandoned building just a few blocks away. It wasn't much, just an old storage facility with busted windows and a leaky roof. But it was shelter, and tonight they both needed a beat. When they got close to the old building, Ben knelt down next to the dog and rubbed at its ears. "All right, buddy, this is home for now." Ben led the dog inside, and he made no protest. He curled himself against the cold cement floor, his ribs rising and falling in slow, uneven gasps. Ben sat next to him, drawing a worn blanket from his backpack and covering them both. He exhaled, looking at the ceiling, the weight of the night trailing into his bones. For the first time in years, he had company. Then, a sound, software, almost imperceptible. A growl. Ben froze. His gaze dropped down to the dog, who had perked up its ears. It felt the low, rumbling sound vibrate its chest, suddenly alert. Ben's pulse quickened. He listened. There, A shuffling just outside the door. Ben's breath hitched. He'd spent enough nights out in the streets to feel the difference between the wind and something else. Someone was out there. His muscles tensed. His fingers closed tighter around the cold metal of the rusted pipe he had stashed nearby for protection. The dog, still curled up beside him, emitted a low, warning growl. Ben's heart pounded. Then, an outline moved past the shattered glass. Ben's fingers tightened around the pipe. He was barely breathing, straining to hear, listening for another sound, another movement, anything. But after a long, agonizing pause, silence, nothing. A pall of unease hung in the air. Ben swallowed hard and exhaled slowly. Perhaps it was merely in his mind. Perhaps the tiredness was playing tricks on him. But then he looked at the dog. Its fur was bristled, its eyes keen, fixated on the door. Its breathing had altered, deliberate, measured, prepared. This wasn't fear. It was instinct. Ben didn't know why, but he felt a shiver run down his spine. This dog had encountered peril before, and something told him it would not be the last time tonight. The sun rose slowly over the city, bathing the buildings in soft orange and gold. The morning chill still hung in the air, but in the abandoned storage facility, Ben hadn't gotten much rest. The night before echoed in his mind over and over. That shadow in the window, that uneasy silence, and most of all, the way the dog had responded. Ben rubbed the sleep out of his eyes, glancing over at his new friend. The dog lay curled beside him, fur ruffled, chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. For a second he seemed normal, just another stray. But Ben knew better now. He was different. There was something different about him. He wasn't just any dog. And today, Ben would learn why. A hidden clue. Fitfully, Ben sat up and reached for his bag. He'd managed to scrounge some scraps from a nearby cafe the day before, and if nothing else, the dog needed food. But as he tried to go, something drew his attention. A glint, faint, but there. He frowned, leaning closer. It was from the dog's neck. Ben's breath caught. Under all that dense fur, something was concealed. Gingerly, he extended a hand, brushing his fingers against the dog's neck. Something cold brushed against his fingertips. Metal. His stomach tightened. He moved the fur aside, exposing a weathered leather collar. Ben's pulse quickened. The dog had belonged to someone. His hands shook a little when he turned the collar, fingers probing for a name tag, an ID. Anything that would tell him who this dog was, really. And then he found it. A tiny metal tag, scratched and dented, yet complete. Ben gulped and wiped dirt from the letters, etched beneath, and when he saw the name, his breath froze. Max. The name gave him a weird chill up his spine. Maximum, a simple name, nothing unusual, but something about it felt off, like it wasn't the dog's body, as if it had been gifted to him, not by means of love, but by constraint. Ben grimaced, turning the tag over, and that's when he saw it. A second engraving, faint, smaller, as if someone had tried to wipe away. Ben's heart raced when he read the second name. It wasn't Max, it was something else, something that sent a chill down Ben's spine, a name that ought not to be there. And suddenly, Ben knew. This wasn't some random stray. This dog had a past. Someone had tried to bury it. Sunshine spilled in through the barred windows of the decrepit old building, and fingers of gold reached across the dusty floor. Ben held the collar, touching the scratched letters on the metal tag with his hands. 2 names. One, Max, clear and bold, like someone wanted the world to know who this dog was. But the second, the writing was faint, all but illegible, Someone had attempted to take it off, erase it, yet it was still there. Ben squinted, wiped his thumb over the letters, struggling to decipher the name under the scratches. And then, little by little, the letters became visible. Charlie. His breath hitched. Charlie, not Max, not a nameless stray. This dog had an identity, a past. Ben's mind raced. Why else change a dog's name and then try to cover up the old one? What had happened to Charlie? And more importantly, who had done this? The vet visit. Ben realized he couldn't look away from this. The dog, Charlie, Max, whatever his true name was still weak, his body shaking from hunger and fatigue. He needed help. Ben had not seen a vet in years. No money, no ID. The very idea of walking into a clinic was laughable. But this wasn't about him. This was about the dog, and Ben owed him that much. He shoved the collar into his coat pocket and petted the dog's head. "All right, buddy, we're going to get you checked out." Charlie gazed up at him with those deep amber eyes, as if he knew. Ben let out a slow breath. This was crazy. He didn't even have a plan. But if there was one place that might have answers, it would be at the vet. With that, he got himself up and began walking. Charlie followed. An unexpected reaction. The corner town's small veterinary clinic wasn't much, but it was sufficient. Ben had walked past it dozens of times, always peeking through the windows at the warm, clean inside. A place he didn't belong. But here he was, opening the door, Charlie next to him. A receptionist looked up from behind the desk, eyes flickering slightly at Ben's ragged coat and the shaggy, exhausted husky at his feet. Do you have an appointment?" Ben hesitated. But the dog, he's not well. I just want somebody to look at him." The receptionist frowned, but before she could speak, a voice from the back interrupted. "I'll see him." A mid-40s woman in a white lab coat stepped forward. Her bright, clever gaze fell on Charlie, and then she froze. Ben noticed it instantly. There was something different in her expression. She looked at the dog for a long beat and then continued, this time slowly. Where did you find him?" Ben's stomach tightened. Why? The vet didn't respond immediately. Instead, she knelt, reached her hands low against the sides of Charlie's fur to feel his ribs, to check his ears. Charlie didn't move as she studied him. Then she grasped the collar of his shirt. Ben's breath hitched. He had tucked it into his pocket. She didn't need to see it. She already knew. Her face pale, she gazed up at him. This isn't just a stray. Ben's heart pounded. Then what is he? The vet hesitated. Then, in a voice hardly above a whisper, she said, "He's a missing dog." Ben's breath caught. Number not just missing. By the way she looked at him, Charlie had been taken, and now someone was going to come looking for him. The vet's words landed in the air and sat like a bomb on a fuse. He's a missing dog. Ben's stomach twisted. He glanced down at Charlie, who was quietly sitting beside him, oblivious to the mayhem occurring. A missing dog. No, a stolen dog. The vet had not yet removed her hand from Charlie's fur. Her fingers were shaking just a little. She swallowed, raising her eyes to Ben. "Where did you say you found him?" Ben hesitated. "I didn't. He found me." Her eyes narrowed. "When?" Ben clenched his jaw. "Last night." The vet sighed and rubbed at her temples. This isn't good." Ben's pulse quickened. "What's going on? Who does he belong to?" She shook her head. "I don't know yet. But this dog, he didn't go lost. Someone wanted him gone." Ben also had a shiver down his spine. "What do you mean?" The vet beckoned him to follow her into the back. He paused for a beat, then nodded, whistled for Charlie to follow. The clinic's back was cleaner than anywhere Ben had set foot in years. Glowing lights, the smell of antiseptic, medical devices lining the walls. The veterinarian pulled a tablet from the counter and began typing furiously. Ben shifted uncomfortably on his feet. "What are you looking for?" "Missing reports," she said under her breath. "We get lots of notices about stolen or lost dogs, especially purebreds. If Charlie was abducted, there would be a report on him." Ben frowned. "Why are you so sure that he was stolen?" The vet turned a shrewd gaze on him. "Because somebody wanted to wipe him out." She opened up one of her desk drawers and removed a small handheld scanner. Ben's eyes widened. "What's that?" She turned to Charlie. There could be a microchip if he had a previous owner. Ben's stomach clenched. If Charlie had a microchip, his real identity would no longer be a mystery. The vet knelt down next to Charlie, stroking his thick coat. "Hold still, boy." Charlie didn't move. He just looked at her, those deep amber eyes locking onto something almost human. She placed the scanner against his neck. A second later, beep. Ben's breath caught. The vet's shoulders tensed. There was a chip. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she creaked the tablet toward Ben. His heart nearly stopped. A name flashed up on the screen. Not Max, not Charlie, something else entirely. And beneath it, a status, stolen. Ben took a step back. His head spun. This dog had an owner. Somebody out there had been searching for him. But whoever had taken him had wanted to ensure he was never found again. The vet spoke hardly above a whisper. "This dog, he is part of something big." Ben swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" She exhaled shakily. "I need to make a call." Ben's pulse hammered. "To who?" The vet locked eyes with him. "To the ones seeking him." Charlie stiffened next to him all of a sudden. His ears perked up. And in that moment, Ben knew. If someone had taken this dog once, they may be coming back for him. Ben's fingers balled into fists on the keyboard, staring at the screen. Stolen. The word weighed heavily on him, resting on his chest like an impossible weight he couldn't shrug off. Unbeknownst to Charlie, on the threshold in that very moment unfolded the chaos. Or maybe he wasn't, because the moment the vet had said she was making a call, his ears had pricked up. He was listening. He was waiting. Ben swallowed hard. "Who are you calling?" The vet hesitated. "The registry." Ben shook his head. "And then what?" "What happens to him?" The vet exhaled. "If someone's owner is still searching for him, we need to report it. That's how this works." Ben's jaw tightened. "And what if the person who took him is still out there?" She paused. "Then we need to be careful." Her fingers wavered above the dial pad. Ben's stomach twisted. Everything in him screamed to not let her ring. But before he had a chance to speak, Charlie growled. Low. Warning. Ben's breath hitched. The vet scowled, looking down at him. "What's wrong, boy?" Charlie's hackles were raised, and there was tension in his body. His head jerked toward the clinic's front window, his gaze fixated on something outside. Ben turned, and his blood ran cold. A black SUV, parked right across the road. Its windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but something about it felt like every hair on the back of Ben's neck stood on end. The vet noticed it too. That car wasn't there before. Ben's pulse hammered. It wasn't. Charlie growled again, eyeing the vehicle with amber eyes like he knew, like he remembered. Ben's throat tightened as a lump formed. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was watching. The vet's fingers recoiled from the phone. She swallowed hard. "I think maybe we can hold off on that call." Ben never took his eyes off the SUV. "Yeah, maybe we should." The air felt thicker now, tense, unstable. Then, the engine of the SUV sprang to life. Ben held his breath. The car didn't move, but it just idled there, sitting, waiting. Charlie was shaking now, but not from fear, out of anticipation. Ben had no idea what was coming, but one thing was clear. Whoever had taken Charlie somehow knew where he was, and they weren't gone. Not yet. The black SUV hadn't budged. Ben stood paralyzed in the clinic, staring out through the glass, the sound of his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Charlie fixed on the vehicle, his body stiff, a low growl rumbling in his chest. If that car was just driving, whoever it was, they weren't just driving by. The vet exhaled shakily, retreating from the front desk. "This is bad." Ben barely heard her. His mind was racing. If they'd found Charlie, it meant one of two things. Either they had been his actual owners, or they were the ones who'd stolen him in the first place. Ben's intuition told him it was the latter. His hands curled into fists. "We need to go." The vet blinked. "What?" Ben turned to her. "You said the registry has his owner's information, right? We need to check it. Now." She paused, looking to the computer screen. "Ben, if a bad guy is looking for this dog, that's exactly why we need to know who," Ben interjected. "Because if we don't figure it out first, we're sitting ducks." The vet's gaze flickered to Charlie, who remained focused on the SUV as though he were expecting something. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." Ben exhaled and she rushed back to the computer. Charlie gave another growl. Ben returned his gaze to the window. The SUV's engine revved. Ben's breath caught. For a moment, he thought it was about to spring out. But instead, as if suddenly peeling away, the tires screeched. Gone. Just like that. Ben exhaled and rubbed a hand down his face. What the hell was that? The vet didn't answer, because she was glued to the screen. Ben's stomach twisted. "What is it?" She didn't look at him. In its place, she gently pivoted the screen toward him. Ben's breath caught. Name of the owner is Dr. William Carter. Ben's blood ran cold. He took a step back. "Number that can't be right." The vet swallowed hard. "You know who that is?" Ben's hands trembled. He glanced down at Charlie, who was still on high alert. His mind raced back, years ago. Before the streets, before he lost everything, before he had run. Dr. William Carter was not just some random name. This was the man Ben had spent his entire life trying to forget. The man who had ruined him. The man he had escaped. Ben could barely speak above a whisper. Charlie wasn't just stolen. He turned back toward the vet, his pulse pounding. He was snatched away from the same people I fled from. The room fell into silence. Charlie let out a low whimper, bumping his nose against Ben's hand. And in that moment, Ben understood. This wasn't only a missing dog issue. This was about his past catching up to him. Ben's hands were shaking. He looked at the name on the screen, blood thrumming in his ears. Dr. William Carter. The name cut like a knife to his chest, like a wound that never healed. Ben had tried for years to erase him from his memory, helping them to believe the past never happened. But now, that past had come knocking. The vet's voice was cautious. "Who is he, Ben?" Ben swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. He was my foster father." The vet's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Ben ran his hand over his head looking for air. "I lived with him as a child, a long time ago." She hesitated. "And he owned Charlie. Ben exhaled sharply. That's what I don't get. Charlie sat next to him, quiet now, his amber gaze trained on Ben, waiting, listening. The vet looked at the screen again, scrolling down through records. There is no information, barely, here. A chip registration, nothing stolen, no missing person report. She frowned. It's as if somebody erased the records. Ben clenched his jaw. And that sure sounded like something Dr. Carter would do. He wasn't just a scientist. He was a person who ruled over everything. No one knew that better than Ben. The vet glanced at him again. You've got to be honest with me, Ben. Who is this guy? And why does he have this friggin' dog? Ben took a shaky breath. Then finally, he told her the truth about Dr. Carter. Ben was 6 years old when he entered Dr. Carter's home. At first, it felt like a blessing. A tidy home, hot food, a place to rest. But Ben quickly discovered that Carter was no typical foster parent. There were rules. Strict, unbreakable rules. And Carter didn't merely foster kids when he studied them. Ben never grasped it in its entirety back then, but he remembered the tests, the endless questions. How Carter would jot things down after Ben had responded a particular way. He recalled the doors that had been locked, the murmurs in the other rooms. And most of all, he remembered the dogs. Carter had always had them, specially bred, highly trained. They weren't just pets. They were part of something larger. Years he had spent repressing those memories. But now, as Charlie sat across from him, it all came flooding back. This dog, this very dog, had been there. Ben knew him, not as Charlie, not as Max, but away from the place he had struggled to leave. The vet was wide-eyed, staring at him. Ben, are you telling me this guy had kids as his experiments? Ben shook his head. Not in the way you think. He never hurt us. At least, not physically. He exhaled, but he studied us. He studied them. His eyes flicked to Charlie. The dogs? The room was dead silent. The vet finally whispered, Then that means Charlie isn't simply a missing dog. He's part of whatever Carter was working on. Ben nodded slowly. And then it all clicked. It all made sense. Why Charlie had been taken. Why someone had wanted to wipe his past clean. Why an SUV had been following them. It wasn't merely about locating a lost dog. It was about keeping a secret buried. And now, Ben had unearthed it. Charlie whimpered softly, bumping Ben's hand. Ben swallowed. If Carter is looking for him, then... Before he could get through his sentence, the clinic phone rang. Ben and the vet froze. The vet paused before picking up the phone. She put it on speaker. Hello? For a moment it was quiet. Then, a voice. Calm, steady, but dangerous. Hello, Ben. Ben's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. It was Carter. And he had found them. The phone call had sent a chill over the room. There hung a heavy silence in the air. Ben tightened his grip on the counter as Carter's voice sounded through the speaker. Hello, Ben. It had been years. Years of running. Years of hiding. Years of pretending the past was over. And now, the past was on the telephone. Ben's voice was low. How did you find me? An amused little sound on the other end. Calm. Almost amused, like Carter had been waiting for this moment all along. Come on now, Ben. You know, I always find what I'm looking for. Ben's stomach twisted. Charlie emitted a low growl next to him. His amber eyes riveted on the phone as if he could identify the voice. Maybe he did. The vet stood paralyzed, her fingers quaking slightly on the counter. Ben swallowed hard. What do you want? A pause. Then, Carter's voice cut in again, steady and collected. I think you already know. Ben clenched his jaw. Charlie, another chuckle. Ah, so you have figured it out. Good. That means we can save time, so we don't need to waste. The room felt colder. Carter's voice quieted, but it wasn't comforting. It was controlled, calculated. I need you to get him back, Ben. Ben's pulse spiked. When he spoke, he could hardly hear his own voice. Why? A beat of silence. Then Carter sighed. Because he's not yours. Ben's heart pounded. He's not yours either. Another pause. A longer one. Then the threat came. Ben, you know how this works. You don't have much left. No money, no home, nowhere to go. I'm giving you a way out of this mess. Ben's breath hitched. Carter's voice sharpened. Whoever brings the dog back, I walk away. No questions, no consequences. Ben curled his fingers into a fist. And if I don't? The answer was instant. You won't like what happens next, then. Ben's stomach dropped. Charlie gave another growl and stood protectively at his side. Carter let out a breath on the other end. I'll let you think about it for a moment, but not too much. You know how these things work. A click. The line went dead. The silence in the room was so thick it was suffocating. Ben breathed out, his mind not even capable of thinking. The veterinarian, who was speaking first, was quiet. What? What just happened? Ben ran a quaking hand through his hair. That was Carter, she swallowed hard. And he wants Charlie back. Ben nodded, his throat dry. The vet hesitated. Are you planning to turn him in? Ben's jaw tightened. He had a lot to lose, and everything in him screamed no. But Carter was no random man searching for a missing pet. He was dangerous. Ben knew firsthand what happened to people who crossed him. He had resources, he had money, he had power to make people disappear. And now Carter wanted Charlie. But the worst part? Ben still didn't know why. His stomach twisted. He glanced down at Charlie, who was still on high alert, his muscles wound tight as though he was poised to defend Ben with his last breath if need be. That's when it hit him. But this was not solely about Charlie. This was about both of them. Ben wasn't safe anymore. Neither of them were. His voice firm but quick. He looked to the vet. We need to get out of here. The vet's eyes widened. What? Where? Ben's chest tightened. Anywhere he can't find us. Charlie moaned, bumping against Ben's leg as if he understood. Ben didn't have a plan. He didn't have money. But one thing was certain. If Carter wanted this dog so desperately, it was the only thing Ben could do to keep him, because Charlie was more than a missing dog. He was the linchpin of a secret that Carter tried to bury, and Ben had just dug it up. The moment the phone call ended, the walls of the clinic seemed to close in. Ben's mind was racing. Carter had found them, which meant he had probably been watching them for a while. Charlie must have felt it too. His fur was bristled, ears flicking in every direction, waiting for something or someone to appear. Ben turned to the vet, his voice sharper than he intended. We need to go. Now. She blinked. Go where? Ben shook his head. Anywhere but here. The vet hesitated. Ben, think about this. There's no time, he snapped, his pulse hammering. Carter doesn't make empty threats. He's coming for us. The vet swallowed hard, then nodded. Okay, Ben exhaled, trying to steady himself. They needed a plan. But just as he turned toward the door, Charlie let out a deep, warning growl. Ben's breath caught. Then the clinic lights flickered. The vet froze. No, no, no. The power cut out completely. Darkness. A thick, suffocating silence filled the room. Ben barely had time to react before, bang! A loud thud came from the clinic's front door. Ben's stomach dropped. Someone was already here. The vet's voice was a whisper. "Ben." Charlie was rigid, his amber eyes locked on the doorway, his entire body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Ben grabbed his bag. "We need to get out the back." The vet nodded, already moving. Ben reached for Charlie's collar, guiding him toward the back exit. But just as they made it halfway through the hallway, another bang, this time closer. Ben's breath hitched. Someone was inside the clinic. The escape, Ben and the vet reached the back door. Locked. Ben cursed under his breath, fumbling to undo the latch. Charlie stood beside him, his growl deepening. The vet was shaking. "Hurry!" Ben's fingers finally found the lock. With a sharp click, the door swung open. Cold air rushed in. Ben grabbed Charlie's collar. "Go!" The vet dashed out first, Ben and Charlie right behind her. They spilled into the alley behind the clinic, the pavement slick with old rainwater. The smell of damp asphalt and city grime clung to the air. Ben turned back, just in time to see a shadow move inside the clinic. His heart stopped. There was someone in there, and they had just missed them. The vet pulled on his sleeve. "Come on!" Ben ran. Charlie bolted ahead, his instincts pulling him forward. They sprinted through the alley, turning corners blindly, their footsteps echoing against the brick walls. Ben didn't stop until he saw an open construction site. "Here!" He pulled the vet inside. They ducked behind a half-built concrete wall, their breaths coming in sharp gasps. Charlie stood in front of them, his ears still twitching, his chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. Listening, watching, waiting. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the city. Ben forced himself to breathe. They had escaped, for now. But Carter wouldn't stop. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ben turned to the vet, his voice hoarse. "We need to disappear." She nodded. "And go where?" Ben looked down at Charlie, who was staring at him like he already knew the answer. And that's when it hit him. There was only one place left to go. Ben exhaled, looking back at the vet. "We go to the only person who might have answers." The vet frowned. "Who?" Ben swallowed hard. "My old foster sister." The city was still alive behind them, but Ben felt as though he was trudging through a ghost town. The vet had consented to help, but the terror in her eyes was undeniable. She had witnessed what kind of power Carter possessed. It was obvious to her this was no longer just about a lost dog. Charlie walked along beside them, silent but watchful, flicking his ears at every sound, his body coiled, prepared. Ben's mind raced. He hadn't spoken to her in decades. His foster sister, Mara, she had been there. She had known Carter. If anyone had the answers, it was her. But why would she even want to know him? Would she even help him? The meeting. The old apartment complex was exactly as he remembered it. Run down, paint faded, tang of damp concrete in the air. Ben paused at the doorway, fists clenched in his hands. Then he knocked. For a long time, nothing. Then footsteps, a lock clicking. The door opened a crack, half sure, half fearful, and a pair of piercing eyes eyed him suspiciously. Mara. Her gaze locked onto Ben. Then slowly, her gaze drifted past him, right to Charlie. Ben swallowed. "Mara, I need your help." She didn't say anything. She just stared. Then the door creaked wider open. A past that was never buried. Mara's apartment was compact, though lined with stacks of papers and books, plus a corkboard on the far wall, layered in documents, news clippings, and notes. Ben's stomach twisted. She had been digging. Mara folded her arms, propping herself against the wall. "You look like hell." Ben huffed a laugh. "Feels about right." She nodded toward Charlie. "Where'd you find him?" Ben exhaled. "That's why I'm here." For a long moment, Mara studied him. Then at last, she walked to the corkboard, tearing off a yellowed piece of paper. She threw it on the table in front of Ben. Ben's eyes widened. A photo, a group of dogs, and in the middle, Charlie. Ben's breath caught. "This is from 10 years ago," Mara said in a subdued voice. His eyes were fixed on Mara's wall of notes as though he made some sort of recognition. Ben exhaled. "So, you're trying to tell me Carter wasn't just training dogs, he was experimenting on them?" Mara nodded and looked grim. "Not just any dogs, special ones." Ben's pulse spiked. "Special how?" Mara hesitated, riffling through the folders on her desk. Then she saw what she was looking for. She slid a folder toward Ben. "Heightened instincts," she said. "Unusual intelligence. Faster response to human emotions." Carter was not only testing them for protection, he was searching for something deeper. Ben grit his teeth as his grip tightened on the file. Charlie made a low, soft whine. Mara's voice was softer now. And Charlie, he was one of the best. Ben felt as though the wind had been knocked from his lungs. Everything made sense now. The way Charlie had discovered him, how he had responded to danger before it had ever occurred. He wasn't just a stray dog, he was made for something more substantial. And now Carter wanted him to return. "The trap is already set." Ben ran a hand down his face. "All right, say I believe all of this. What do we do?" Mara sighed. "You don't have many choices, Ben." Ben exhaled sharply. "There's always an option." Before Mara could respond, Charlie's body stiffened. Ben's heart stopped. Charlie's ears perked up, his nose twitching as if he sensed something. Ben knew that look. He had witnessed it before, having just before something went horribly awry. Then, a car engine right outside the apartment. Mara's face paled. Ben didn't waste a moment snatching up the files and cramming them into his bag. "We have to go." This is a developing story. Mara only had time to react before bang. Then a loud crash at the front door. Ben's pulse skyrocketed. They had found them. Mara swore under her breath. "I have a back exit." Ben nodded. "Then we use it." Charlie was already on the move, his body pressed tight against Ben's side, his ears pinned back. Mara picked up her laptop and ushered them to the back of the apartment. But just as they were by the door, the lights flickered. Ben felt it before he saw it, the shift in the air. It was repeated by Charlie's low, warning growl. They weren't just here to locate them, they were already inside. Ben hardly had time to react before the door exploded open. With a thunderous bang, the door flew open. Before Ben could even process what he was seeing, 2 men in black tactical gear burst through the door, eyes fixed on Charlie. Charlie growled, then snorted. Ben acted on instinct, pushing Mara behind him and grabbing the nearest object, a metal lamp, almost ready to fight if necessary. One of the men put his hands up. "Easy, Ben. We're not here to hurt you." Ben's blood ran cold. They knew his name. Mara stiffened beside him. Ben tightened his grip on the lamp. "Then why the hell are you bashing our door down?" The other man's shoulders hunched as his gaze flickered to Charlie. "We're here for the dog." Charlie emitted a deep, rumbling growl, moving in front of Ben. Ben shook his head. "That's not happening." The first man exhaled. "You don't understand. This isn't about you, Ben. It never was." Ben's pulse spiked. "Then explain it to me." The second man hesitated. Then one spoke from behind them. "There's nothing to explain, Ben." Ben's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. A silhouette appeared in the doorway. Tall, clean-cut, calm. Dr. William Carter. Ben felt like someone had punched him in the gut. Carter was just as he had recalled. Cold, methodical, always in control. But this time, he wasn't looking at Ben. It was on Charlie. Charlie didn't move. He just stood there, his amber eyes fixed on Carter like he had seen him before. Because he had. Carter brought his hands behind his back and tilted his head. "You've been busy, Ben." Ben clenched his jaw. "You keep the hell away from him." Carter sighed, as if he were disappointed. Still so stubborn. His eyes darted to Charlie. "And you, my boy, you've put us through quite the chase." Charlie's snarl deepened. Carter's eyes darkened. Ben stepped forward. "What do you want from him?" Carter raised an eyebrow. "You already know the answer to that." Ben's chest tightened. "He's not just a dog." Carter offered a slight, sinister smile. "Number, he's not." Mara exhaled sharply. "You did experiments on him, didn't you?" Carter barely glanced at her. "I improved him." Ben's hands formed fists. "You made him a weapon." Carter's smile didn't fade. "I transformed him into who he was supposed to be." Charlie lunged, but Ben caught his collar at the last second, yanking him backward. Carter didn't flinch. His men advanced, weapons raised. Ben's breath came fast. This was it. They weren't escaping this one. Then, Carter spoke again. His voice was calm, controlled. "I am offering you a choice, Ben." Ben's stomach turned. "What choice?" Carter met his gaze. "Come with me, bring the dog, and no one gets hurt." The room was filled with a cold silence. Ben's mind raced. He knew what this was. Carter had a fondness for more than Charlie. He wanted both of them. Ben swallowed hard. Then he looked at Charlie, and Charlie looked back. In that moment, something passed between them. Ben wasn't certain how, but he knew what Charlie was thinking. "Don't trust him. Don't go." Ben's voice was hardly more than a whisper. "No." Carter's face darkened, and that's when mayhem ensued. Ben's answer darkened Carter's face. "No." The word hovered in the air like a gun cocked and loaded. The tension in the room blew up all at once. One of Carter's men was the first to react, going for his weapon. But before he could even draw it, Charlie charged. The dog hit him like a bullet, his body a blur of muscle and instinct as he wrestled the man to the ground. Gunfire erupted. Ben took Mara's arm and ran. It was a mess. Yelling, smashing, cracking noise, banging things falling over. Ben barely had time to think. They had to get out. Now, Charlie's snarl rippled through the air as he dodged a second assailant, his teeth bared. Carter's voice rang out, "Don't hurt the dog!" Ben's breath hitched. Of course, Carter didn't wish Charlie dead. He wanted him back. Ben gritted his teeth. "Not gonna happen." Mara pulled open a side door and Ben pushed her over. "Go! Get to the alley." She hesitated. "What about you?" Ben turned back to see Charlie still engaged in a fight, his body moving with a precision that vastly exceeded any normal dog. His mind raced. Charlie wasn't just trained. He was built for this. Ben's chest tightened. Carter had black magic something to him. But Charlie wasn't fighting for Carter. He was fighting for Ben. Ben clenched his jaw. "I'll get Charlie. Just run." Mara gave him one last glance, then fled into the night. Ben looked over exactly when Charlie evaded another strike, his amber eyes fixated on Ben's. And in that moment, Ben knew. Charlie was not simply fighting to protect him. He was fighting to be free. Ben picked up the first object he saw, a broken chair leg, and swung away hard. The impact sent one of Carter's men slamming into the wall, and Charlie dealt with the other. Ben ran to him and grabbed his collar. "Let's go, buddy." Charlie didn't hesitate. Together, they ran. The final choice. The alley was dark and wet from the earlier rain. Mara had already passed the end and turned back apprehensively. Ben's heart pounded. They had seconds, maybe less. Charlie's ears pricked up. He was paying attention. Ben turned back, and there he was, Carter. Still in the doorway with his hands behind his back, he watched them with that same cold expression. Ben's breath came fast. Carter shook his head, nearly disappointed. "You don't understand, Ben." Ben's fists tightened. "Oh, I understand plenty." Carter sighed. "Charlie is not who you think he is." Charlie went stiff next to Ben. Carter continued. "He's special. He was always destined to be more than a pet." His voice was steady, convincing. "He belongs with me." Charlie growled. Ben exhaled. "You're wrong." Carter tilted his head. "Am I?" Ben swallowed. "Yeah." He gazed down at Charlie, whose amber eyes blazed with something profound, something fierce. Loyalty, not to Carter, to him. Ben turned back to Carter. He already found his place where he belongs. Carter's jaw tightened. Ben didn't wait. He turned and ran. A new beginning only. When they were well into the city, far enough that Carter's reach couldn't follow, did they stop running. Mara was panting, hands on her knees. "You think he'll try and come after us again?" Ben exhaled. "Maybe." He looked down at Charlie. "But we'll be ready." Charlie gave a little wag, pushing his nose against Ben's hands. Ben rubbed behind his ears. "We stick together." And for the first time in years, Ben didn't feel alone. He had run for so long. But now he had a reason to stay. Charlie had saved him, and the rest of Ben's life was spent ensuring that no one took him again, because they were no longer just a man and a dog. They were family.